What was the moment or event in your life that took you from active addiction to active recovery? Many people in addiction recovery speak of a moment that was almost a spiritual awakening, a moment where they decided to stay sober and everything falls into place. That wasn't necessarily my experience. I had been to rehab twice, but I did not go with the intention of recovery. I went with the intention to appease my family and manipulate my way through the system. I believed I could use rehab as an opportunity to regain trust, leave, magically secure a job, and use successfully. And the third and final time I went to rehab was no different. I entered without the intent to change. Even when on my second week inside, I was rushed to hospital because of acute kidney injury. When I was taken back to the facility, I immediately reverted back to my usual tactics. And one day in group therapy, I started to share my rehearsed story of trauma. I went into detail about my childhood trauma, and then discussed the loss of my cousin who had passed away a few years before. My cousin was like my sister, and I knew how to elicit sympathy in the way I told that story. I knew when to hold back tears, when to let the tears out, but that counselor in the room that day was not reacting the same way other counselors had reacted. Because she didn't react. Instead, she looked me dead in the eyes and said, "How does it feel using your cousin's death as an excuse to do drugs and traumatize your family even further?" That moment broke me. Because she wasn't wrong. I had spent my entire addiction thinking I was the only victim in my story. And trust me, there were times pre-addiction and during addiction where I was the victim. I had been abused. But what I had never stopped to acknowledge was the fact that I had actually become an abuser too. I brutally harmed people in my life when I was in active addiction. I had also actually never mourned the death of my cousin. Instead, I made it all about me. Not once did I consider my aunt and uncle who had lost their child, or my cousins who had just lost their sister. I never really cared about their grief or mine. Instead, I used it. I also quickly found out that that counselor was a recovering addict herself. And you can't bullshit a bullshitter. That's the importance of community and the importance of one addict helping another. Her words in that moment of self-awareness didn't lead me to immediate change. Instead, it marked the beginning of a gradual shift. I started doing the work. I confronted the person I had become and didn't want to be that person anymore. Not a sudden decision, but the beginning of a journey towards self-awareness and behavioral change. You see, much like addiction is progressive, so is recovery.